Okay, we are coming up on the next church age, and right now I want to mention about what's going to be coming up, not next week, but it'll be within a few weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. We're going to take advantage to watch the American Heritage series. We saw this a few years ago and on Sunday afternoons, and this is a good time to do this, and you'll love it all over again. Okay, let me see. If you've come from another country, you want to watch stuff like this because this is what got us to where we are today. And understanding our spiritual heritage is far more part of what it means to be an American than so many other things so many other noble things, so many other great things about America. This is the greatest. So we'll be watching this now. If you happen to miss, I'm right now I was just trying to find it up online. I was at wallbuilders.com. They deal with American history and just wonderful stuff, very insightful stuff, very thought-provoking stuff. That's who produced this series. And when I was looking at their playlists on their YouTube channel, I couldn't quite find this, but then I Googled and I saw that Encourage TV. Let me see. Oops, no, I don't want to do that. Okay, I was on the wrong screen. At Encourage TV channel, I'll be putting links of this up on the update to have, but it looks like they have these. I'm looking at these titles, and they're not the titles that I have here, and they're both called the American Heritage Series. But what that means, if I can find these particular videos up on the playlist up online at Encourage TV, then I'll use the Encourage TV ones so that I can get those links out to you, and if you want to be able to see them at home. When we're doing this over the Sundays when we watch them, they might not play well from here on Zoom, but you'll be able to look at them at Encourage TV on your own, especially because I'll have the links. But I want to point out that I've got 10 DVDs here, and I'm looking, they've got 26 they've got 26 episodes. Okay, more than building on the American Heritage series. They get more. You can go on here, and there are even more videos, and you could just watch these kind of things all day long, and they really go into the place of Christianity in America and our spiritual heritage in all kinds of ways at wallbuilders.com, here at Encourage TV. So that might be something that you might want to just have for your viewing pleasure at home sometime. So I recommend it. Now they are, let me see. I can't think the name of their movement. Reconstructionists. Reconstructionists have a view that you should have. Some Reconstructionists will say we need to have only Christian people in Congress. Well, I agree with that, but they're thinking that maybe it should be put into law. And I'm only speaking offhandedly. It's not that firm, but it goes into that kind of mentality. But I don't necessarily think they're totally wrong even on something like that. So you might be aware of that, but I think because they have so much rich heritage, Christian heritage in America, that you'll find that wonderful to watch. Okay, so when we get up to in our book, The American Revolution, a few pages, that's when we'll start looking at these series, because what was happening in the American Revolution was not just an issue of taxation without representation. That makes a good blurb for a television show or in a movie or something like that. But the American Revolution was so very much a movement of God. When they talk about American exceptionalism is not Americans saying, ha ha ha, we're better than you are. Okay, that's not what American exceptionalism is. American exceptionalism is referring to God's use of America and how God set things up for America to be able to have the Christian impact that the country has had. In fact, this will go to, let us do lessons in church history now. This goes to what is a favorite area of church history, the Church of Philadelphia age. It's not favorite because it's more interesting. Okay, they're all interesting, but it is so impactful for our time and for the history of Christianity, the history of the churches. It's so impactful because of all the things that were set up during this church age. If you might remember, when we go back to the Church of Ephesus, the times of the apostles, we remember that there were so many things that were just so that worked together to cause the spread of the church. You remember that you had the Roman road system, and along the Roman roads were key urban centers, and so missions spread along those Roman roads. It was easy transit to get to the world. Previous to that, you'd had the establishment of the Greek language, which was ideal for philosophical considerations. It's a language that was built for the logic of philosophy, and you had that as the language of the world at that time. Much like English is very widespread across the world as a business language, Greek was used that way. Even in the Roman Empire, Greek was more popular than Latin. You had the spread of the Jewish synagogues across the empire because of the captivities that they went through, and so you had the Bible influence across the world, and so you had all these elements that were coming together. And then you also had the idea of the church, which was a Greek idea that was employed instead of the word synagogue, which spoke of the church on a mission, God's people on a mission. The synagogue was not set up that way. It was set up as a learning and prayer center. It was not set up as an enterprise for going out in missions. And so you had just all the ripe elements for the church to spread at that time. Well, after all the other previous church ages, you had now the Church of Philadelphia, the Philadelphian age, and it also is very ripe for, it was also very ripe for the spread of churches and Christianity and missions in the world. So we will, we've looked at Ephesus, the church that lost its first love, the suffering church, the church of Smyrna. Remember that suffering was something that kept the church kind of pure because there was a lot of purging going on because people were dying for their faith. You had to be very serious about your faith if you were going to last in that church age. But then came a sort of captivity of the church when in the Pergamus age, around 300 AD, when Constantine made religion free, and then when the church was adopted as the state religion, you had the church going into captivity because you had the seat of Satan, and all the Babylonian mystery religions were introduced into that time period. Well, As I said this morning, sin makes you stupid, and then stupid breeds stupid. Okay, you go to the Thyatira age, and that lasts from the creation of the church state. You had 1,000 years of that state church gaining strength and bringing with it all kinds of heresy and all kinds of pagan ideas that had been brought into the church, until finally you get to the Sardis church, and they started to break free of that state church. Remember, the state church idea is a very important component. Okay? It is very much aligned with the principles of communism, where you have the state is the head of things. It is no longer people being responsible before God. They were responsible to the state, so that in the Reformation, as that started to break down, the whole state church idea was breaking down, making room for independent churches, which is the original design that Christ had in mind for the church. That you had churches local and responsible before God on an individual basis. So you're getting away from a state-enforced religion, and because it's the state enforcing it, it's going to have a lot of problems, because when you put a king or an emperor or a tyrant who's determining things spiritually, they're not really well qualified. When we look at American politics, I'm very thankful for the impact that Ronald Reagan had, for instance. But Ronald Reagan didn't go to church. I think he might have had private services or something like that. What happened there? Then you finally get a Baptist into the presidency, Bill Clinton, and, okay, enough said. Then you get George Bush, who was, well, before Clinton, George Bush, who talked about the New World Order, and all the fundamentals are going, what is he saying? Does he know what he's saying? Then you get the younger Bush, who was, his testimony was clear that he was born again, but, kind of, wishy-washy, not as powerful that way, but at least he had more of a Christian testimony. You come up with Obama. Obama does not have a Christian testimony. It's in print. It's not a Christian testimony. Followed by, we get Donald Trump. Donald Trump got a lot of stuff. He has people praying for him all the time. On his testimony, maybe he's saved. But that goes to the point. The point is this, that these political leaders, as spiritual as they are, they're not a pope. They're not an archbishop. They're not going to be like our pastors who are studying the Bible, and that's their primary thing. They've got to do government. We like them to be Christian. We want them to be close to Christian values, even if they're not necessarily, got a great testimony. But we're not counting on that. We're not counting on that. We're supposed to be praying for our leaders. It's true, and so we want to do that. But the important thing is that it is the church that's going to carry things forward, not the state. So we don't want the state to control religion. We don't want the state to be over it. The state leaders, as good as they can be, okay, if you want to claim whichever president you want to, they're not ordained men of God, let's say it that way, and we recognize that. Okay, so we get to this Philadelphia age, and this is where, with the American Revolution and the Bill of Rights, when we have freedom of religion stated explicitly, and the state is separated from the church as far as control is concerned, not separated in influence, but separated in control, now churches are going to thrive. Missions becomes the modern missions movement, where you have missionaries to this day going out all across the world, and from other countries, they are sending their missionaries as well. So this is why this age is a whole lot more fun a very favorable, just wonderful experience, the Philadelphian church age. Now, we don't know exactly when the Philadelphia age is going to end or has ended, because history is far easier to study the more in the past it is. Okay, when you're currently going through history, you got to wonder: are we in the Laodicean age? We could make a case for that. Are we still in the Philadelphian age, the age of revival? Can we can have revival. Who knows exactly what's going to happen? But we're going to say that the Philadelphian age is from the mid 1700s to the late 1900s, and we don't know exactly when. You can say 1750 to 1950. Okay. Okay. So the state church is becoming a dead institution, and the power of the local churches is going to flourish. Let's look at Revelation chapter 3, verses 7 to 13. And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, These things saith he that is holy, he that is true, he that hath the key of David, he that openeth, and no man shutteth, and shutteth, and no man openeth. I know thy works. Behold, I have set before thee an open door, and no man can shut it. For thou hast a little strength, and hast kept my word, and hast not denied my name. Behold, I will make them of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews, and are not, but do lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before my feet, and to know that I have loved thee. Because thou hast kept the word of my patience, I will also keep thee from the hour of temptation, which shall come upon all the world in the Laodicean age, I'm inserting here, to try them that dwell upon the earth. Behold, I come quickly. Hold that fast which thou hast, that no man take thy crown. Him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out. And I will write upon him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, which is New Jerusalem, which cometh down out of heaven from my God. And I will write upon him my new name. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. Okay, the key aspect here is that God has an open door that no man can shut, and a shut door that no man can open. There's going to come a time when God's going to judge the churches in, like I say, the Laodicean age. But during the Philadelphian age, it's God who opens the door and keeps it open. So looking at page 220 in paragraph 631, the kingdom of the world fought to develop its control and power in a state church, but God's plans cannot be stopped. The Philadelphia church has an open door that no man can shut. The Philadelphian churches will be wildly successful in a spiritual way, in contrast to the worldly way when Constantine had provided a political success in the Pergamus age. So we're going to have a spiritual success that corresponds to the political success, but what you want is the spiritual success. The success of Constantine certainly, provided some opportunities. In paragraph 632, with the pressure of political persecution removed after Constantine, the expansion of the church was burdened with the church-state union. Yes, you had the expansion of churches because they were having the persecution stopped, and so they did have some flourishing. But it was immediately having like a lock put on it by the state church union. The persecution ended because the state was controlling the church from within. Instead of trying to control the church on the outside, the state invaded the church and now took over control from within. The difference in the Philadelphian age was that the political persecution was removed because the state took its hands off the church. So instead of trying to control things from within, well, the hands of the state are removed completely from the Philadelphian age. The state moved to control itself, leaving the church to control itself. The influx of people from the state into the church in the time of Constantine corrupted the church. The influx from the Spirit left the churches to succeed based on how aligned they were with the kingdom of God in the Philadelphian age. So it's kind of a shame you have... Okay, I want to shut that. Okay, my hand hit a button. Okay, we do have all kinds of churches, and it can be frustrating as you have people, especially with the rise of the internet, everybody's an expert in things like that, on church matters. Yeah, that's going to happen. But, we have also greater freedom, well, I should say greater opportunity ourselves, too. That's the nature of a state with freedom of speech, okay? You don't shut down the other guy's speech. You just make sure you speak up instead. Paragraph 633, however, just as freedom and success, even under the state system, weakened the churches in the Pergamus age, freedom and success in the Philadelphian age will contribute to weakening the churches by becoming fat and lazy. Yeah, we got the freedom, okay, but it makes people take things for granted too, and it's going to become apparent in the Laodicean church age that follows. Okay, so when are we going to say that the date of the age of the Church of Philadelphia started and ended? Well, the beginning of the Philadelphian age was about 1750, and we want to go on and talk about the real catalyst having the American Revolution that really put freedom of religion as part of the Constitution. But around 1750, you're starting to get these great revivals. It was in the middle of the revival movement around 1730, and the peak of the first Great Awakening was about 1740. Now, sometimes as you're reading, you might have heard about the Great Awakening. How many people have heard about the Great Awakening? That's pretty good. Okay. There were several. Okay. There was a second Great Awakening. In fact, it's suggested that that Great Awakenings seem to happen on the period of about 70 years. And so we have things that sort of look like awakenings here in America on a 70-year cycle. Even to this day, it is suggested. Okay, so you had the first Great Awakening in 1740, then the American Revolution, 1775, and then the second Great Awakening in 1790 went up till about the year 1830. The early revivals certainly characterized the Philadelphia age, but the American Bill of Rights in 1791, because the American Revolution also helps establish the beginning, because it broke any hope for a state-authorized or sponsored church. And so this removed the encumbrances of the previous age, that Sardis age. We call it the dead age. In fact, in spite of the fact that the Reformation had so many great gains and so much impact, it was still called the dead church. But for us, we have truly those things removed. Okay, so in fact, as it says here, in the previous age, it was left stunted in denominational creedalism. You can see that back on page 212. So they had stagnancy because of how they had resorted to their creeds. Brother Joe.
Yeah, I guess my question is regarding the Church of Sardis being the dead church. We would, as you mentioned before, and you would think that with the Reformation, it would have just been an explosion of evangelism, but it wasn't. And what role do we think Calvinism played in that? In that it never just really got outside of its own personal circle?
I wouldn't think of it as a causative effect. Okay, I think it was the fruit of the times. I don't know how small you would draw that circle, because Lutheranism had the Calvinist effect. Presbyterianism in Scotland had that effect. The Reformed Church in Switzerland, and then even into England, it had its play. So it was a large circle, but I think that was when people were seeking something to turn to. That was a thing to turn to. It was certainly different than what the Roman Catholic system had, and so it was. I think it was more of an effect than a cause. Okay, so again, back in the time of the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, the medieval times, there, you had a lot of dogma that was driving the church. Well, by the time you get to the Reformation, you didn't have dogma per se to drive the church. They were going back to the Bible, it's true, but by developing their denominational systems, even though they were using reason and they were going back to the scripture, they were still getting locked in, maybe not to dogma, but to their own system of doctrine, into their creed. So they were getting locked down. When you look at churches today, it's kind of interesting. If we're going on vacation or something like that, when we go to, we'll look up a nice fundamentalist Baptist church and everything, but I always have an ear for listening for what are the differences, okay? That's because each church is responsible for what they're going to preach, and not everybody can be right like me. I mean, but what is nice is that all these churches are coming to their conclusions and the stands they're going to take because they study, okay? Because they are examining the scriptures, and that's the key idea. And you're really not going to find much variation from churches that are Bible teaching churches. Okay, so paragraph 635. Mentions a note here. 1900 is often referred to as the end of the age. I mean, when I looked this up and I was looking at time periods and things like that, regularly 1900 is picked as an age. But there's no regular reason given as to why. Okay? Just know that that's what they say. For our purposes, 1950 as a mark for postmodernism fits the spirit of the relativistic Laodicean age, which is the end of the Philadelphian age. So you're picking 1950 because 1950 marks when you started having literature and philosophical movements going off into postmodernism. Postmodernism does not like truth. Well, actually, they do like truth. Your truth, his truth, the other person's truth, and how they see it. I don't know if somebody's phone is going off because of the alarm. Okay, sometime you might get a state notice. Okay, so for them, truth is relative, and it's that relativistic mindset that's also going to plague the churches. There will be coming a sermon up somewhere in October, I think it is when it's scheduled, dealing with the issue of the ecumenical movement. The ecumenical movement means, is the one church movement, trying to bring all the churches together. Stupid idea, okay? It's not a good idea. And sometime you're going to have somebody say that to you. You're out there witnessing, And people say, why don't all the churches get together? No, 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 you don't want that. You don't want that. Because in order to do that, each church has got to give up its particulars, its distinguishing features. So if you want to say that Jesus Christ is God, you're not going to be able to get along with a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon. Okay? If you want to talk about salvation and get along with everybody, you're going to have to give up eternal security, or you're going to have to give up the very gospel itself. And you're going to have to move on into works, because that's going to be the consensus of what's out there as churches in the world. So about the time that you have postmodernism as a philosophy being established, and you can read about that on page 264, that might be a good place to say, well, that's the beginning of the church age, which means that we're in it, and oh well. Okay, but not necessarily. But that we'll have to figure out. Give us about 60, 70 years, and we'll see. Okay, because we'll be in heaven looking down and watching. Yeah. Okay. So that's how we date the Philadelphian church age, and why we use those dates. The introduction of postmodernism to end the age, and the great revivals that went along with the establishment of the United States. Let me ask if there are any questions. Brother Tone, yes. We'll get you a microphone.
It's not a question, Pastor, but I'd like to just relate the Philippine experience.
Okay, yeah.
To the datings of the various periods, because before President McKinley sent its military to the Philippines in 1900, we were under Spain for more than 300 years, and that was from 1521 to the 1900s. Mm-hmm. But they introduced two things only: a form of European type government, as well as the cross, the Roman Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Now, the advantage of the Americans, well, McKinley decided that because he considered Filipinos savages, he brought in not only the military, they brought in educators, and they brought in missionaries. Mm-hmm. And particularly the missionaries, although it involved several denominations like Presbyterians, Methodists, Baptists, like that, it set a foothold for familiarity with the Bible to people, because only the priest before that knew the Bible, and the Bible is supposed to be in Latin. Mm-hmm. And Filipinos worship the God that was introduced to them using a language they don't even understand. So education is carried on over today, and it's very much like patterned after America. Mm-hmm. And that's why whether consciously or unconsciously, the general doctrines in the Declaration of Independence, as well as the American Constitution, were a great influence on the form of government in the Philippines, as well as the practice of religion, because this time theirs was more free, and they had to have a justification for the missionaries to operate freely. The only exception is for those areas controlled by Islamic people, which is concentrated in the south. So I'm saying that the period of revival, that was felt even in the Philippines, and however the Roman Catholics would insist that they still have 75% of the population as Catholics, that's no longer probably the statistics, because it probably is much less than that.
Yeah, yeah.
So if Paul said that even if Christ is preached even in pretense, as long as Jesus Christ is preached, to him that is a credit, for the Christian movement, and that's why we have. And the second thing is that not only churches through the missionaries, but schools like the university I entered was a Presbyterian missionary school. Although I studied by the Bible as a Hebrew literature, not as a spiritual book. So it's a good thing that these things were happening, and to the credit of McKinley, he's the one that really introduced this.
Yeah.
In fact, we have a base where we live before it became Fort Bonifacio. It was Fort McKinley.
Yeah. Okay. Brother Aswin, you're from Guyana? Guyana. Okay. And do you have any insight on the missionary movement going down into Guyana from around that time period? Do you have anything that you can remember about that, the effect of missions in Guyana?
I don't want to mislead around that period. No.
Okay. Give that some thought this week, and call up some pastors and say, hey, how did missions come into Guyana? and see what they say. Okay. Yeah, that would be interesting. Okay,
I could remember when I was a little girl, very pretty, young, going to Sunday school. There were missionaries coming from the States, mostly here, going down to Guyana because they used to be visiting the churches. That time, I used to be attending as a little girl with my uncle. They call it the Pilgrim Holiness Church.
Mm-hmm.
And there used to be missionaries going in. I remember, like, Christmas time, they would carry things for the children, little toy stuff, and these kind of things, and literatures and so.
Yeah.
Yeah, but about 2 years back, there were some missionary going in the region 9. It's far up in the riverine area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they went up there, and Chinese. Yeah, and I think it was some Spanish people. They were missionaries going over to those places. Yeah, some missionary does go to Guyana.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brother Aswin, yes. Did you have more? I thought you were signaling that you had more. Okay.
No, missionaries to Mama I've always gone to Guyana. There's always been missionaries to Guyana.
I would be interested in, let's say...
Remember, we were colonized by the British.
Right.
So the British, they had influence over Guyana, period. Not American. The British or the people who had influence over Guyana.
But the thing is, the missions movement became especially strong out of America because of the freedom of the churches. England did, different countries did, but there was something about the modern missions movement. See if you can find out maybe something about from the 1800s. That would be about the time period to be interested in. Yeah. Okay. Okay, well, very good. We are going to look at the character of the age next week, and we'll talk about the old lights versus new lights controversy and see how far we can get with that.